Hello and welcome to Gardening in 58 North. So in this video I'd like to give you an update on the front garden, and this will be the first kind of major changes that I'll be doing to the front of it. All I've done so far is make that small semicircle bed at the front. So in this video what I'll be doing is I'll be taking out the dahlia here, make sure it's protected over winter. We had about -4 the other night, just briefly, but it was enough to kill off the top half. Bottom half should be okay. Normally wouldn't let a dahlia be outside with -4, but it was quite a brief temperature drop, so the roots should be fine. They're also planted deep enough that the frost shouldn't have got down to that level. But what we'll be taking out is the Viburnum here, which was actually it was actually covered in flowers, but that hard frost did destroy all the buds. So there's a few new ones coming out, but it's basically been blasted by the frost. I'm going to be transplanting this hopefully to my parents' garden. It is a little bit big to be transplanting, so what I'll be doing is cutting it down quite low. That's so I can fit it in my van, because my van's quite small, as you can see over there. So I need to make it smaller, but also when it transplants, I can't take all the roots out, and I won't be able to support all this top growth. So what I need to do is take off a lot of the top growth so it matches more with the root system, and that way it's more likely to survive. And it'll be the same procedure as well with the hazel here. The hazel is quite big. This might not transplant well. It depends how the roots are established. If there's a few smaller roots towards the base, that should be okay. But if they're mainly larger roots and all the feeder roots are in the 2 or 3 meters away from the base of the tree, then it will probably die. But I'll try transplanting this anyway. It's a contorted hazel. It's completely lost its shape though, because the way it's been pruned in the past, it's been pruned almost like a topiary or a hedge. So it's been constantly trimmed, so it doesn't have that nice kind of appearance that you'd expect from a contorted hazel. So what I'll be doing is I'll be cutting this quite low, just keeping about 1 or 2 foot on the stump, letting it regrow, and then having it grow into a much nicer, more kind of contorted shape. But as I say, this is quite a big plant, and the bigger the plant is, the harder it is to transplant, because you have to cut off more roots and it's more likely it will die. But I'm moderately hopeful that this should survive. However, with the Viburnum, I'm more like 90% sure that should survive. So I'll go ahead now, set up the cameras, and what I'll be doing in this part of the video is cutting it back, getting it down to size, and then hopefully later on I'll be digging out the root system and transporting it over to my parents' house. So the reason I'm getting rid of the 2 shrubs is because this is going to be a flower bed. There will be a shrub actually planted in the exact same place as that, but it'll be a much more smaller shrub. It's going to be a type of a butylon, a blue flowered one, and that will just look a lot more in keeping, whereas this hazel, unless I keep it constantly trimmed, will get really large, and it will make a nice windbreak for my parents. So that's part of the reason it's also going over there, is they need some protection from the wind, and as this gets so big, I'll make a good windbreak. And on this other bed here, I'm not planning to have any shrub in that location, but there should be a laburnum tree going in just towards the gate area there. So I need to clear out this space for the rose bed that will be going in, and there'll also be a little patch of lawn at the back. But basically I need to clear the site, get it ready for the rose bed, and also for planting up some of the trees. So that's now the Viburnum and the contorted hazel now cut down. You could almost see this as a how not to prune video, because this won't respond nicely to this. It's going to send out lots of straight shoots, and it's going to look a bit odd. Normally when you prune it, you try and cut it back to a nice point where there's buds coming out, and you try and keep a different height in the branches as well, because this will re-sprout really oddly. Same with the contorted hazel. I'm expecting the growth from this to be quite unusual. And not particularly nice, so I'll probably have to do some follow-up pruning on these plants in a year or 2 as the new growth comes through, if they do survive, that is. But the main reason I'm having to cut them like this is just to get them in the van. As I say, I haven't got space, so I need to cut them down to size just so I can fit them in this van. And I'm doing it now because it's winter, but also because I'm only going to have the van for another month or so, and then I'm getting rid of it. So I need to make sure I cut these down now. So I'll come back later in the video where I'll be digging out these and transporting them off to my parents. Hopefully we can get them to survive. The material from this will either be chipped and used as mulch in my parents' garden or my garden, or as firewood. And there's a local wood turner as well, which might be quite interested in some of this contorted hazel, as it should have a nice grain to it, and with the spiral effect it might look quite interesting as well. In fact, the pear tree that I cut down a few months ago was turned into a few different items from a wood turner. I purchased one of them. I'll put a picture at the end of this just to let you see what it looks like. The grain's quite nice, and it's come out as like a nice little vase. So both the shrubs now cut back, I now need to start digging them out. So to get the best survival for these, I need to really keep as much root system as possible. But the problem is, if I keep all the root system, then I won't be able to transport it, and I won't be able to physically lift or carry these. So it's going to be a trade-off between keeping as much root as possible so that the plants don't die, but also taking enough root and soil off so that I can actually carry it and lift it into my van. The Viburnum here shouldn't be a big issue. It's not a huge plant that I can easily transport, even if I keep quite a lot of the root system. But the contorted hazel here will be the real problem. This is going to have quite an extensive root system. It's quite an old plant. You can see the stem's quite large, and it was quite a big plant originally, so taking this out will be a bit more tricky, but I'll probably have to get my father to help me with this, because the root system on this will be quite heavy if I'm going to have to keep most of it for it to survive. So this is where the two shrubs will be transplanted to. This is the woodland section of my parents' garden. The larger contorted hazel will be in this side, and that should grow close to the wall but not too close to cause any damage to it, and that will just provide some protection from that end of the garden, because there's no houses on that side, so the wind does blow through quite bad if it's from the east. And then the far side, that's where the Viburnum's going, and we don't want anything too tall there, otherwise it will shade out our neighbour's house. But this is how they look anyway. This is the contorted hazel. You can see I couldn't keep too much of the soil on it. The reason for that is this was quite a mature shrub. All the feeder roots were actually quite far from the base of it, so all the soil fell off. There's a few feeder roots on this one, you can see some finer roots, but generally it's the thicker ones, so this has got the least chance of survival, but it should be okay. This is basically like being planted like a bare root plant, and bare root you can do that in winter, so this should survive, but it will be a little bit touch and go. It will be a bit stunted probably for the first year. We'll just have to look after it, make sure it's well watered until it gets its roots re-established. And it's interesting to see the original stake, even though this tree is really quite old, it's probably at least 20-30 years old, the original stake's in there. You can see it's actually grown around it there. It goes in one side down at this point, and then it actually comes out the other side down here, so it's completely inside, you can't actually remove it anymore. I thought that was interesting to see. So I'm going to plant it in this section here, and I'll just show you the other one. And the Viburnum over here is going to be planted where this rose shrub is. The rose has never done too well over this side, so I'm going to take that out, put the Viburnum in here, maybe slightly further left where there's a bit more space in the bed. And the Viburnum itself, the roots came out with quite a lot of the soil still attached. You see it's got a lot of smaller, finer roots, feeder roots. So this was a bit heavier actually than the other one because there was so much more soil, but this one has a much better chance of survival. Also, the roots don't spread as far, so I don't have to dig such a deep hole on this one, whereas with the contorted hazel over there, it's going to be quite a large hole I need to dig. And with the contorted hazel, there's quite a bit of prep work. We had an old shed standing up here, an old flat pack shed, that's part of it over there, but there's a lot of glass and broken material which I had to first of all remove before we get started. So I'll get digging now and I'll show you the results once they're planted. So that's the 2 now planted. Unfortunately it's a little bit dark now, as it's December, it's 3 o'clock and the sun's just starting to set here in Scotland. But this is the contorted hazel anyway, that's now in place. We just need to put some mulch around it, and I also need to cut off some of the suckers. With the contorted hazel, it often tries to revert back to its root system, which is just a normal straight hazel. So I need to just cut some of these suckers off before they take over in spring. But this should hopefully survive. We will need to be extra careful with this in spring. We just need to make sure we water this regularly. If there's any dry spells, it could easily die because the roots will be quite small, and it needs to get its roots established and get the roots deeper so it can survive the drier spells. So this will be quite touch and go for the first summer. It's the same story with the Viburnum. This looks a bit more embedded just because we've mulched it as well, so this is pretty much in its final appearance. The other side with the contorted hazel, I will also mulch that as well. But as you can see, this is now nicely planted and watered in. Same again, this needs to be well watered. It'll probably put on a lot of growth and it might look a bit odd, so I suspect with both of these plants I'll need to do some pruning in about a year or two's time just to get them a nicer shape, just because the way I pruned them to try and get them in my van, I didn't prune them in a very nice fashion. So we'll see how they grow, but this will probably need a bit of pruning in a year or so. And if these do survive, I'll give you guys an update next summer and show you how they're doing.